usually white or light colored. So we have all of these chemicals that we know if we mix this with this, we get this color. We mix this chemical with this, and it comes out pink, and we got heroin. If we mix it, it comes out orange, then we have oxycodone, just as an example. So there's an identification through a chemical process. And on the right is identification of blood. If we find something that you hear it's a blood-like substance, we don't know. It could be ketchup, it could be some kind of Tabasco sauce. There's actually some things that are very, very close looking like blood when they dry up. And we have a process that we can put this chemical called phenolphthalein on there. And if there's any heme, which is part of the hemoglobin in the blood, and we add a little peroxide, if there's any blood there, we'll get this bright pink example like that. And we'll say, okay, now we have blood. But that's presumptive. That does not tell us if it's human or animal. Now, you've seen that, and I'm sure heard that in a lot of cases. They'll find blood in the trunk of a car, and it'll end up being a deer blood from somebody shot a deer, and they put it in there, etc., things like that. So we can distinguish in the next battery of tests. And of course we have biology, DNA. Watson and Crick in 1953, they identified the DNA molecule, and they realized, hey, this is something wonderful for crime scene investigation, forensic science, because it individualizes people. You know, the DNA you find at a scene, it belongs to one person. Just like fingerprints as well, but we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between those. And then we have a microscopy in the 1600s. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, he was a businessman and a scientist. He invented the microscope. So all of a sudden, can you imagine? All of a sudden, we could never see things that were really tiny, and now we can put them under a microscope, and we have a whole new world. On the bottom left is a comparison microscope for bullets, and that's me when I was a lot younger, with another student doing a comparison between two different bullets, the bullet that came from a victim and the bullet that we came from a certain gun, and we're trying to see if it's a match. So it's a comparison microscope. On the top right is another student doing getting their doctorate degree, doing microscopy. And on the bottom right, does anybody know what that is? No? That's marijuana, well, one kind. And it has what we call bear claws. So it might look, you know, in your hand like it's hard to tell between some of the dried herbs and things like that and marijuana. But when you put it under the microscope, they have a clearly different look. And marijuana, in many cases, has what these little hooks, we call bear hooks, and it's very distinguishable. So the microscope was an amazing tool for us. And then we use physics, and physics is definitely, we're trying to combine the study of energy and matter. How does energy and matter relate to each other so that it helps us to reconstruct a crime scene, like perhaps where was the bullet, where did it come from? Did it come from the top, bottom, left, side, things like that. That can help us with sequence of events. So physics is a very, very, very important part of crime scene investigation. But even within that, experts on the bottom is the example of the disagreement between experts and the Kennedy assassination. People who said, oh, that came from this way, and that happened first, and somebody else said that came from that way. Dr. Bond and Dr. Angel, two different people, experts, saw it a different way. So we don't always agree, and that's, of course, part of being human. And then we have photography. Photography is our dear friend, because a lot of times things will change, or they change once you come in and you take a body away, or you take evidence away, and all of a sudden you don't have that scene the way it looked in the first place. So on the top left is Annie Lee. That was a case out of Yale in 2009, and she was walking into a building. She was a graduate student walking into a building, and she never came out. And she was about to be married on the next Saturday, and we have her on television, video, audio, they have outside the buildings, going in and never coming out. So that helped us to know we don't have to search around the city, wherever when she went missing, she's in that building. It took several days to find her, but she was actually tucked away in the wall. She'd been murdered by a lab tech who didn't like her, who's obviously mentally ill, and he killed her and hid her body in the wall. And believe it or not, the staging area for the police and the FBI was right outside the wall where they ended up finding her. Can you believe it? And they also found in the wall some DNA, which threw them off for a while, and that DNA belonged to one of the construction workers who had helped build that wall back when that lab was built. So that's how good our technology is now, but it also confuses things because we bring up all of this evidence, what truly belongs to this scene. And on the bottom right, that's Lana Clarkson in the Phil Spector case. And he said she came over his house after a few drinks and committed suicide. Picked up one of his guns and committed suicide. And, of course, the prosecution said, no, he shot her. That doesn't make any sense. So the position of her legs and the gun is very important evidence to us in reconstruction crime, along with a bunch of other things. And on the top right is the way JonBenét Ramsey's bed looked when the police came. So that tells us information. There's clothes on it. It might tell us, did somebody sleep in here, or did somebody just get up? What were they wearing? Blah, blah, blah. And we got to go through all of that stuff. And no one had been in the room until the police got there, so this is how it was left last. And the bottom left is from the Casey Anthony case, the duct tape that was found around Kaylee's mouth when her body was found. She was decomposed, but there was a duct tape that was around her jaw, and on that was a little heart sticker. So we take a picture of that because over time that's going to disintegrate, right? On the bottom, that's going to change. We're going to move the body up there. The bedroom's going to change up there. We don't know where Annie Lee is. So photography, we freeze that in time. So we want to visualize and identify potential evidence of a crime scene. How do we do that? How do we know what are all of our disciplines? Well, like I said, we have chemistry, biology, microscopy, physics, photography. That's a lot. So here's some examples. A bullet on the top left can be out there where we have striations in the bullet. We can look at that under the microscope. We have a note that was left at the Ramsey house. That's important, right? That's a very good piece of evidence. On the top right is a hair follicle. We can look at the hair follicle and we can tell you under the microscope if it's Caucasian, what race it is, things like that. On the bottom left, well, we have a bunch of drugs and a lot of money. That's a pretty good clue. In the middle, the broken glass, a bullet came through there. We can tell by studying the glass if the bullet came from this side or that side, that kind of thing, and about what angle. And of course, fingerprints, and then some more bullet casings at a scene. Those are all different kinds of evidence that we gather and bring back to the laboratory. And no one piece tells the story, okay? They all tie in together to tell us the story of how this came down. So what we want to do, bottom line, is to link the suspect to the scene, okay? Or corroborate or refute an alibi. So we have evidence, and that helps tell us, is this suspect that we're interrogating telling us the truth? Because if what we have is quite different from what they're saying, then we know that they're lying or something's amiss. It can identify a bad guy or a victim. It can also exonerate the innocent. The DNA Innocence Project, huge. We didn't have the technology back in the day, and there's a lot of people who are being let go from prison, exonerated if they're lucky enough to get their lawyers, or probably have enough money to get their lawyers to reopen a case. They'll go over evidence, DNA evidence that was untestable at the time. We didn't have the technology to do it. We didn't have that minute technology. Now we can do stuff with evidence that's been sitting there for 40 years, whatever. Stuff that would have never been able to be tested before. So exonerating the innocents is very important. Inducing a confession, another thing sometimes, if you got the evidence, one thing you go, okay, yeah, you're right, I was there, I did it. There's no point in arguing about it. Or it can just lead us in a direction. Go this way, abandon that. This is where the evidence is pointing, leading. But the first thing we gotta do is recognize it. So if you're in this giant scene of, say you're outside, or you're in a big mess inside a building, or chaos, you can imagine, like, for instance, the school shootings. You have the victims, you have the emotions, you have the positions of people, you have blood over here, that over there, that over there, that over there. What's important? But you also had all of these students walking around prior to that for years, you know, and their fingerprints are there and here and all of that stuff. So what's relevant to this particular situation? So we have to be able to recognize what's important. That can be a huge task. You know, just deciding, yeah, that piece of paper is worth taking back, that is not, and we can be wrong, too. For example, in the Nicole Brown Simpson, one of the most important things that didn't happen in that case was that there was a blood spatter on her back that we know from photographs. So we photographed it, the investigators photographed it, but they didn't collect it. So we know from looking at the picture what blood spatter was probably hers, and then we know from looking at that very much more closely than this, from the way the drops on the blood spatter is that blood on her back, certain drops there came from the killer. That were the killer's blood. So if those blood droplets had been collected and DNA tested, there would have been no lengthy trial. I mean, there would have been a lengthy trial, but we would have had our answer, pretty much. That would have been it. And that was missed. Inexperience, being nervous, too much going on, too many people, all kinds of things went wrong in that case. And that was the big one right there. And then we have to collect the stuff. What do you collect? In the top left, Casey Anthony case, found her body, her little body was found decomposed in a swamp about a mile from the house. That's not an easy place to start collecting evidence. There's mud and muck and this and that, and people probably go parking out there and go drinking out there, and everything. There's all kinds of stuff, right? What belongs to that scene? On the top right is the Green River Killer. You take a body out of water, man, you have all of that stuff on top of it. Water, you know how water can disintegrate things and change things and wash away evidence and hairs and fibers and all of that stuff. Not easy. World Trade Center on the bottom left. Bucket Brigade. I was part of that, just collecting, looking through the evidence. How do you know if that wire that you just picked up belonged to a bomb or something, or it belonged to somebody's computer on the millionth floor? You don't. That was the difficult thing, okay? It's very difficult. And the bottom right in the O.J. Simpson trial, one of the gloves. Okay, so where that is, we have to find it, we have to see it, we have to realize it's important, then we have to collect it properly. And then once we collect it properly, we have to preserve it, to preserve a chain of custody. So if you don't preserve a chain of custody, then it's going to get thrown out of court. It's going to be reasonable doubt, oh, did that come from this, did that come from that, or did somebody tamper with that? Is there, police, did the police get together, is there a conspiracy to do this, to charge somebody with this crime, whatever. So everything has to be documented every step of the way. There can't be any break in that, because a smart lawyer will use that in court to say, reasonable doubt. How do you know? How do you know what happened to this? Matter of fact, in the O.J. Simpson case, Detective Van Natter had a vial of blood that had been drawn from O.J. Simpson. He put it in his pocket, and instead of bringing it to the laboratory that day, it sat in his pocket, and then in his pocket, in his jacket, in the trunk of his car for 2 days before it was turned in. So another, oh really? How do they, of course, the defense is like, how do you know who tampered with that, where that was, what happened? How do you even, how do you know that? So that's chain of custody is everything. And of course, it identifies people. On the top is Helicrafts. Did anybody ever hear about that case of the wood chipper? Famous case in Connecticut. The guy was an airline pilot. His wife was an airline stewardess. That's how they met as well. But she went off on some mission, he said, and she never came back. But in reality, on the top right is what was left of her on the banks of the Housatonic River after her husband chipped her up in a wood chipper. So identification again, the bottom, we got a white powder. Under the microscope, that's what it looks like. Does anybody know what that is? Somebody say cocaine? Yep. Whoa! Okay, how do you know that? It is, it's cocaine. You a lab person? Oh, no. No? You just know, it's the user. Okay. But again, that's how we, thank you for being honest. That's how we identify things. We do the chemical test, and we look at it under the microscope. That's pretty distinct, right? Most white powders don't look like that, but cocaine does look like that. So here's a little bit about Hella Crafts. She went missing on my birthday in 1986. I think it was like 23 or something. Snowplow driver's driving around, and he saw somebody with a wood chipper on the banks of the Housatonic River, and he thought, well, that's weird. What are they doing down there? But you see things, and just goes. But then he did finally report it, and the police, when the wife went missing, that was reported. Helen was reported missing. They went to the house, and in the house they found receipts for a wood chipper, a chainsaw, a chest freezer. They had missing carpet and a comforter, and they go down to the banks of the Housatonic where that gentleman driver said he saw someone wood chipping something, and they found less than 3 ounces of human remains. And 2,660 bleach hairs, some teeth with unique dental work, and some fingernail polish, which actually a friend of mine had the pleasure of identifying through Mouse Beck. She could tell which, I guess group photography, I mean. So she did the testing on the fingernail polish. And some typo blood, which was Hella Craft's blood type. So here's some of the pictures of the evidence. There on the right that's what was on the shores. And some of that was evidence, and some of that is just blood. That's what it looks like, more than 3 ounces. But there was a tooth. Tooth was very important. Believe it or not, teeth, dental work is hugely important because it's very unique. And most of us go to the dentist all the time, so we have nice x-rays and pictures of our teeth. And then we have fingernail and hair and different things like that. All belong to Hella Crafts. So we knew she wasn't, as her husband said, visiting her mother in Sweden. Now, the types of evidence we have is a bunch of different types. We call them by different names, depending on their characteristic. And one is called transient, pattern, conditional, transfer, circumstantial, and eyewitness testimony. So here's an example of transient. That's something that changes over time. So if you have footprints on the beach and there's a body missing, but over a short period of time, that's going to change. It's not going to look like it did right when it happened. So again, if you didn't get this didn't happen to be there and get this on photography, bye-bye, it's gone, right? On the right, blood alcohol level. Okay, that could be evidence, but if you wait 24 hours, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be much different, so that evidence is no good anymore. So we call that transient evidence. It changes with time. And then we have pattern evidence. We love pattern evidence because it's really helpful to see a muzzle stamp. I mean, what else can that be up the top left corner, but that gun was right against the temple of that person's head. Blood spatter down the bottom left, that's from the Michael Peterson case. I'll be talking about that later on in the cruise. That's a lot of blood spatter. That tells a story to us. Top right, that's a bullet wound, but it tells us by the beveling, the way the bone is caving in there, and the color, the soot, and the radiating fractures tells us that that's an entrance wound, okay, rather than an exit wound. That can be very, very important. Bottom right, teeth evidence. That's actually how they caught Ted Bundy in the end of his illustrious career of murdering women. He never left us any evidence, and then he went into a frenzy on the second to the last murder. He was at a sorority house and he bit this girl in the butt. And we had this perfect teeth mark impression. He didn't have pretty teeth. He had kind of weird teeth, so it was like even better for us. And then conditional, they kind of tell us what the conditions were at the time. If you look at a fire, and there's a fire going on, we can take notes. It's happening, say it's happening right now, and the color of the flames, etc., can tell us if an accelerant was used, how hot that fire is burning, things like that. On the top right is after a fire. We can see pour patterns. We can see where the fire started. That could be very, very good evidence. Bottom left, well, we know something went there, or the person's a hoarder, or just really messy, or a teenager. Wants some one of those things. On the bottom right, there's a body of a child found in the woods, and that shoe was 20 feet from it. Okay, that could be very important evidence. So that will be documented, photographed, all of those things. But it's conditional. It happened at the time that the crime was committed. And then we have transfer, of course. If you bite somebody, it's beautiful when you bite somebody, because you don't only give us teeth mark evidence, you give us saliva. So then you give us DNA too, so we like it. If you want to be bad, bite somebody. Top right is Monica Lewinsky's dress with the DNA evidence on it, okay? Bottom left, Scott Peterson's pliers from his boat with a hair on it, okay? Yeah, and bottom right is hair, speaking of hairs. Everybody here, unless you're bald, is leaving me here right now. Not that it means anything, because there's a million pieces of hair. Thank you. There's hair from an hour ago. There's hair from last night's show. There's, you know what I mean? You can imagine. But if you can narrow things down, hair evidence can be very important. It can at least tell you the national, whether it's a Caucasian, Negro, you know, those kind of things. They can tell us that. Asian. They can tell us all of those things. And if we have the bulb of the hair, if it's pulled out, and we have a good bulb at the end, we can get white cells and we can get DNA from that. But we have to have that bulb. If you cut your hair, you're not going to get a bulb. You won't get DNA from it. So here's the DNA testing from the Monica Lewinsky. And basically, there's only one person there, and that's the end of it. We know that this was Clinton's inside job, so to speak. And here's the stats at the bottom. The chances that it was a black person is 1 in blah, 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 da, da, da. So we have statistics. We look at it and say, what are the statistics that this could be someone else? No. And then we have circumstantial evidence. People think of that as like, oh, that's not very important, but it really, it convicts a lot of people. Scott Peterson, everything in that case, I don't know if anyone remembers that case from the West Coast. I'm going to talk a little bit this week about, if I get all 3 of them in, if I have that opportunity. We had 3 Peterson men. Any Petersons in here? No? We had 3 Peterson men within 2 years that murdered their wives and made famous cases. One was a writer. One wife was pregnant. He was a fertilizer salesman, that's Scott Peterson. But his wife was 8 months pregnant at the time. And so we have the writer Michael Peterson, and then we have Drew Peterson, who was a police officer. And his 4th wife went missing after his 3rd wife was found to right help. So, sometimes, going back to circumstantial evidence, in Scott Peterson's case, all we had was circumstantial evidence. We really didn't have any DNA tying him to her in as far as a murder goes. I mean, his DNA in the house, her DNA in the house, that doesn't mean anything. We didn't have anything of that. But what we had was a bunch of tapes to his girlfriend the whole time the search was going on for Laci, telling her that he was in Paris at some convention, and I love you, I'm single, my wife died a while ago, you know, kind of pretty damning evidence. A bag of buttons that helped find Laci that he never even distributed, they were just in the back of his truck, and a homemade anchor that he made right before. There was a couple of them, and a couple were missing. He had made right before Laci went missing. He only got the boat a few weeks before she went missing, and he made these anchors, and one was left behind. Circumstantial, though, doesn't mean, you know, doesn't mean that anything. And then we have witness testimony. Then you have the expert witness. That's somebody by education, experience, like Dr. Henry Lee. I could be an expert witness for certain things, not everything, but he could be an expert witness pretty much on anything. or you have a fact witness. That's a person who was somehow there, saw it, heard it, so they're not an expert, but they can go in there and testify as to what they remember. Where an expert can say, well, I wasn't there, but this is what I gleaned from the situation. Okay, so two different kinds of testimony. So what does it all come back down to? The science. Locard's principle of exchange. Every contact leaves a trace. So you cannot walk in this room without leaving me some DNA, leaving me some hair, leaving me, yeah, you can't, okay? I can't either. So we're all what we call trace evidence factories. We're just always leaving stuff behind, and that's the way it is. So is it usable? Sometimes, obviously, there's a ton of it, so you have to be able to segregate it, identify it, what's important, et cetera, et cetera. But you see in a car accident, there's no way you're not going to get some transfer, right? Paint, things like that. You hug a big tiger, yeah, you're going to get some hairs there. Or dead, you're going to get dead. On the right, domestic violence, you could get handprints, you could have DNA, you could have hairs, you could have fibers, you could have all kinds of things. So we're always connecting with one another and leaving behind some traces of ourselves. And that's the whole game of crimes investigation, to connect. So we need that evidence, we need those pieces, and then we connect. Oh, Sue was with Bill, okay, and then we can figure out those things from there. One piece of the evidence, but that's the basis of it. So it's a linking of everything between a suspect and a victim. That can be transferred, and we associate that, of course, victims and suspects. And on the bottom right, of course, so it's our puzzle, and on the bottom right is DNA, which is our best, because if we have your DNA, on somebody's body, then it's pretty good you were with them. Well, it is fact that you were with them. So we want to link victims and suspects. So we have people like Elizabeth Smart, and we had to link her with the Mitchells, who had kidnapped her for many months, and then she escaped. If anybody remembers that case. Natalie Holloway and Horan van der Sloot. Casey Anthony and Kaylee and Casey Anthony. One of the Petersons, that's Stacy Peterson and Drew Peterson. Okay, he was her husband. She was his fourth wife. And then some of the Burney victims, probably you guys know that case, David Burney, in the Morehouse murders. They lured people, either lured them to their house or kidnapped them and murdered young women. This couple, David and Catherine Burney, he ended up committing suicide in prison. She's still alive. And of course, here's an example of a connection. There was a drop. Everybody remember there was a drop on O.J.'s socks in his room, in his bedroom. He has a pair of socks that were left there when he went off on his trip. He had a business trip. Remember, he was called there to tell him that his wife had been murdered. And there were a pair of socks in there. On the inside ankle of the sock, there was a drop of blood. So we did a DNA, the DNA test evidence was taken off of that. And on the top, and it gives us a pattern. So on the top is the pattern for OJ. You see the three lines in space and the way the three lines go. And then if you look at Nicole Brown, the blood that's on the sock, the next one down, number 30, see that? This one right here. This is the one that was on the sock. So it wasn't OJ's, right? Because this is his pattern. That's a pattern on the sock. Then we have Ron Goldman. This is Ron Goldman. Now that doesn't look like that either, but does it not look like Nicole Brown? You look at that. That's a match. So her blood, there was her blood on the inside of that sock. Of course, that calls into question a million things. Then, because the scene was such a mess, so many things went wrong that all this doubt came in. Well, maybe the police set that up and they took some blood from over there and put it over there and blah, 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 before they collected it. And he'd say, that could be anyone's DNA. No. Not true. So that's why Dr. Henry Lee, when he was in court, He wasn't saying OJ was innocent. What he was saying was there's something wrong here. There were so many things that were wrong, things that weren't turned in at the right time, things that were screwed up in the chain of custody that created reasonable doubt. And that was very unfortunate. So what we want to do in the end is to determine cause and manner of death. I'm sure you hear that all the time on television. What was the cause of death? What was the manner of death? COD, right? And the MOD. So the cause is what happened. What happened? On the left, you have a disease. Here's brain, a slice of brain. And on the left, you have disease. Okay, that's the cause. That person died from some kind of disease to the brain. On the right, to an untrained eye, they don't look that much different, right? But on the right, that's a bullet wound on the right. So that tells us, okay, this is disease, this is either suicide, homicide, accident, something like that. A different, but it was caused in a different way. And the manner is the how. Was it natural? Bad fatty heart attack, okay, that's a natural death. Car accident, Princess Diana's car. Okay, accident, natural, accident. Top right, World Trade Center, homicide. We consider that homicide. That was a purposeful killing of people. The one next to it, then you see the suicide note on the bottom. So it can be suicide, can be homicide, can be accidental, can be natural. It can also be undetermined, when we can't figure out for sure, when we're not absolutely positive what it is. We say undetermined until we can get more evidence to be more specific about it. So the bottom line, why do we do this? Why do we go through all this trouble, try to gather all this stuff, all this evidence, try to connect it to somebody? That's a lot of work, and it's pretty grueling. So the bottom line is, thou shalt not be a victim. No one wants to be a victim of a crime. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator, and that's like just as bad, right? Being the bad guy who hurt someone or themselves or someone else. But above all, thou shalt not be a bystander. You can't just stand there and say, oh, I don't care, that wasn't my mother, that wasn't my kid. Does anybody know where this comes from? This quote? Well, it comes from the Holocaust Museum. So that is the premise behind what we do in crimes investigation, forensic analysis. We don't want to be a victim. We don't want to be the bad guy. So we want to study all of that. Why did these people do this? How does this happen? And we don't want to stand by and go, it wasn't me, I don't care. So that was the whole premise that comes back from the Holocaust. So thank you so much for your attention. If anybody has any questions, thank you. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'll be up in the back. They have to come in here and get ready for the show, but I'd be happy to come up there. This is another picture from the